Welcome, everybody. Good morning. I hope you're all well. And like Dean up in Holland, Michigan, and myself in Northeast Georgia at Lake Raven are enjoying a little fall in the air. It's been in the 40s here at night, and we've had a little fire in our porch. It's been real nice. And of course, joining me as always as co-host is Amanda Sutt, the CEO of Rock, Paper, Scissors in Lawrenceville, just outside of Atlanta, and also the Janus Institute's partner in Prosperous Places. Good morning, Amanda.
Good morning. It's not quite as cool down here out of the mountains.
Well, you're welcome to join us up here. It's just an hour away. Those of you that have been on our webinars before and are familiar with the Janus Institute and the Janus Forum know that this is an open format. The last webinar, we had some great questions, and of course, everybody in the webinar can chat with each other or address questions to us. Amanda, you want to explain that a little bit?
Absolutely. So this is truly a conversation. So this is not just to stand up here and lecture at you. This is about collaborating and new ideas. So there is a chat feature. So if Robert or Michael are on a deep thought and you have a question, go ahead and post it in there. I'm going to be monitoring that and try and interject. When I see a good point, we'll maybe take a breath, or we'll also have some time at the end. So start putting those questions in so that we make sure that we come to them. We want to make sure that if an idea, inspiration strikes, that we're going to be able to come back to that. So.
Yep, thanks, Amanda. And of course, our topic this morning is remote work, and it looks like it's here to stay, at least for many companies and many people, as Dean was talking about. Amanda, you want to show our next slide on the survey? I think some of you know that we did a recent survey of the new normal in economic development. And as you can see from this, many of our economic development practitioners agreed that COVID-19 will permanently affect remote work. 51% said there'd be some effect, and 48% said a significant effect. And then they also believe that the COVID situation would lead to more flexible work hours. Would lead to more flexible work hours moving forward, with virtually all of them agreeing that it was going to create more opportunities for flexible work. And those of us that live around Atlanta even take the traffic back 20 years, which is a blessing. The new normal and remote work presents challenges for companies, obviously, and for remote workers. We've all seen that. But we also believe there are opportunities for companies and workers to gain a competitive advantage by becoming better at remote work. And Michael and I have talked a lot about that. And we also believe there are opportunities for communities to gain an advantage by becoming more remote work friendly. And Michael really opened my eyes to that in the conversations we've had. So that's what we want to focus on this morning. How can companies and workers be more efficient and productive in remote work? And how can economic development agencies assist in this process and help make their communities more remote work friendly? And we have a wonderful guest this morning, foremost expert on that topic of remote work, Michael Dziak. Michael, good morning.
Good morning.
Michael is, and I promised him I wouldn't read his long bio because he has a long one. He's got so much experience in the field, but he is a pioneer in the remote work field. He's launched 2 companies to help firms become more efficient and productive with remote work. Wrote a book in 2001, Telecommuting Success, and really was a go-to resource to help prepare for the 1996 Olympic Games. And as Michael and I were talking, he was relating his experience in the 80s and 90s and earlier than that, possibly, Michael, pioneering days in Atlanta with telework, remote work, and how there was some initial pushback because it was just coming onto the drawing board. So I wanted to ask you to relate some of your experiences just briefly as an introduction, and also touch on why, as we discussed, our webinar graphic itself is a lesson in remote work. Michael?
Well, thanks so much. It's a real honor to be here. I know that the work that you folks do is so important to every community in the nation, and I applaud you for all the hard work that you do. And I know it's not an easy job. Back in the early days, in the early 90s, the internet didn't even exist. The first web page was launched in August of 1991, and I started my business in January that year. And so I knew that there was going to be some kind of technological advancing because technology was moving so fast. So I knew there was a way to get people to work from home. At that time, I was motivated by clean air. The Clean Air Act amendments had just been passed by the United States, and Atlanta was non-compliant. But I discovered very early on that executives were telling me that clean air is not my concern. Tell me how I'm going to make a business case out of it. So the early resistance came from having people actually imagine their employees working from home. Amazingly enough, I discovered over the first 10 years in my business that the first step to any telework program was panic. My first consulting job was they hired Georgia Power hired me because they ran out of parking spaces. So there were several companies along the way that have panicked for a variety of different reasons that caused them to start their program. And today, what's happened with the COVID virus, the whole nation is panicking. And over the 30 years since I've been in this business, this is really the first really good, strong push and acceptance of telework, whether it was under duress or not.
And Michael, let's talk about our graphic a little bit. That was interesting. We picked that graphic out, and then you told us, well, that's a lesson in and of itself on our webinar graphic.
Can you show that again?
Once we picked out our graphic for our to send out the email on our webinar, on this webinar, you pointed out that
I thought you meant the graphic.
Yeah. In itself.
Yeah, you'll notice that the graphic that was sent out with the image of the home working mother with the baby on the table next to her computer is, as you begin to promote telework, as that your organization is promoting telework, this is the one thing I don't want you to do, because it has taken us all these years to convince executives that people will be working in a professional environment, in a safe environment, without distractions. And we advise people under normal circumstances to separate family and work. And so this is exactly the image we do not want to show to people who you're recruiting to bring in telework to their organization.
Yeah, Michael, thanks for pointing that out. I've got a new grandson, so maybe I was partial to that picture, but you're right. That's not the way to do it. Well, let's get into some of our topics that we want to discuss this morning. And I think the first one is the benefits and challenges for companies and employees in remote work.
Well, early on, organizations, as I said, went into this to solve a particular problem. There were an awful lot of organizations that had recruiting and retention issues. They had turnover. They had morale issues. And so one of the things that organizations discovered very early on is that telework actually solved a lot of those. Overhead was reduced because there were some organizations that allowed people to give up their desk and work full time. Absenteeism was helped because when someone is feeling a little puny, not wanting to bring their germs to work, they had the option of being able to work at home. Or if their child was ill, they had the actual option to be able to work at home. And one of the things that it turned out, and statistically later on we learned, that when you're recruiting really good quality employees, one of the things that they're looking for is flexibility in the workplace. And so organizations have become, it's become very common for them to use this as a recruiting tool.
And what are the characteristics then, Michael, of some companies that make them more open to and successful with remote work, but others are not? And you had a lot of experience in that in your Atlanta days and when you worked with companies all over the country doing this.
Right.
So what makes a company open to this? I mean, as Dean Whitaker was talking a few moments ago, some companies are more open to others than others, and some want their employees to get their butts back in their seats in the office.
Well,
What's
first
been your
of all,
experience there?
you know, one of the things, as I mentioned earlier, executives won't invoke culture shifting strategies in their organization unless they buy into it. There's got to be a really good, strong reason for them to do this. And that's where you build a business case. I'm going to improve performance. I'm going to recruit better people. So you first start with the executives and you convince them that this is not going to hurt. Once you've got the, I'm losing my train of thought. Managers are really concerned about losing control over their employees. For instance, one of the most common questions that I got early on was, how do I know they're working if I can't see them? And my question back to them is, how do you know they're working now? So one of the things that we discovered early on is that we were able to discover that most managers didn't really manage their people very well. And once they were trained on how to make their employees accountable, and then once they were able to manage teams that they didn't see, they were much more comfortable with it. And at the same time, what we did was we trained the employees on how to become highly effective workers when they weren't in the office. How do you become visible? How do you stay connected with your teams? And those kinds of things.
Well, like you pointed out earlier, the COVID-19 crisis forced companies into remote work. And I think what you're saying is that one of the main obstacles had been fear of the unknown. And COVID, for many companies, just said, hey, you've got to do this. You don't really have a choice. Can you elaborate a little more, Michael, on how you convince management in a company that, hey, this is okay, and this can actually be a advantage because many of your employers want this to happen? How do you convince management that this is a smart thing to do?
Well, in the company that I co-founded at ework.com, one of the first things that we did was we found that there was an awful lot of resistance. We worked with Fortune 500 companies. And there was an awful lot of internal resistance to telework by managers. And one of the first things that we did was we would present a training course called Making the Case for Change. When you work for a company for 20 years and you've done things the same way for all that time, you better convince me that this is something that I'm able to live with, because it's going to be a lot of work for me to change. And so we actually worked with some very large companies, and in one case, we were able to provide this course called Making the Case for Change to managers, to 10,000 managers in a matter of 2 weeks. And what that did was it got a dialogue going. And at the same time, what the company did was they had messaging within the organization, and they went to the leaders, the voice leaders within the organization that were supportive of it, and they controlled the rumors, and they actually did a massive messaging campaign to gain support, and they had focus groups. And so clearly it is not easy, but it's done so many times successfully that there are plenty of models out there that can help people do that.
And were the companies that you've worked with, were they able, or did they, this was back before COVID, I guess, and it applies still as we go forward. Were the companies able to talk with their employees and say, well, do you want to remote work? You want to come in? Were they able to help accommodate the employee's preference? And did they use any techniques to sort of evaluate which employees would be working at home more and which would be more in the office?
Absolutely. One of the first questions you asked was, how do they, what makes a company conducive to telework? Anyone who is able to telework has portable tasks. So for instance, you know the people that don't have portable tasks, the janitor, the security guard, they used to call them secretaries, but the people that need to be physically in the office, they don't have portable tasks, so they're not going to be eligible. The next step is, once you've identified people with portable tasks, you establish criteria by which they would be allowed to work at home. How long have they been with the company? Are they ready for this? Do they have a good a record? Are they accountable? And so therefore, once we get past that stage, then you evaluate the person and what they do. What's really turned out in this, in a survey I found supports this with regard to COVID, is that once you start teleworking, what happens is you end up with a hybrid approach. It's not binary, meaning everyone's going to work at home and the other ones are all going to be working at the office. So what you've got is, you've got a combination of people who will work 2 or 3 days a week at home and then the rest in the office. And so, and that, not necessarily on the day of the week, but on the workload that they have that requires quiet task management. So it has and the other thing that it is that each individual that would be allowed to work at home would sign an agreement that says, I'm going to work in a safe environment. I'm going to work separate from family requirements. I'm going to make sure that I'm staying healthy. You know, one of the things that people discover is the biggest obstacle to success in a home office environment is the refrigerator. So we help with the coaching on how to manage working at home and making these changes that that are required in order for you to be successful.
Yeah. So the companies that you coach, you help them understand this and coach their employees on how to do this, and I guess lay down a set of rules or guidelines, if
Right.
you will, for that. Do most companies do that? Do you think in our COVID environment right now, where, you know, literally overnight, the companies had to start letting their employees do remote work or encouraging them to?
Well,
do you think they were giving them any instructions, or just go forth and work?
I think most people are just winging it. Although, if you've got a good quality human resources executive, they will look into what makes a successful program, and they would have put together some policy, procedures, and guidelines, because if you don't put rules in place, there's going to be chaos, and thus the complaints that people are not working on Friday, productivities are going down on Fridays, those kinds of things. But in this survey, it says that the remote work will become more normal and formalized where it wasn't before. It said 73% said they expect a quarter or more of their workforce to continue working remotely post-pandemic. And so people, and the other statistic is that most companies are finding that their employees are actually as productive or more productive than they were working in the office. So we have some mixed messages coming in here. And finally, if there are positive benefits that employers are discovering through this process, you can guarantee that there's going to be a lot more telework going on. As a matter of fact, I'm of the opinion that this virus is shifting an evolution of telework that's been going on for 30 years into a workplace revolution. I think we have had such a good taste of telework within our major employers that I don't think there's going to be any turning back, and that their telework is going to be something that is here to stay.
Right. We've got a couple questions I want to get to in just a minute. But before we do that, I want to encourage everybody to think about any examples you have seen of companies in your communities that seem to be doing a good job with remote work, or that are particularly challenged with remote work, and also any examples you might have of friends or colleagues you have that you think are doing it well and why they are, or they're having trouble with it perhaps, and why would that be? So if you would be thinking about that, I want to get to that in just a few minutes. We got two questions. Dean Whitaker has asked, how do employees stay connected and visible? Michael?
Well, the subtitle of my book is Staying Visible While Working Away. There's a variety of ways that you can do that. First, from a manager's perspective, they can check in more frequently. And when they do check in with the employee, they have a list of expectations that they might set. And then at the end of the week or the end of a certain amount of period of time, they might check on those expectations to see if they've been met. Amazingly enough, most managers today don't do that, even in the office. And so they don't really know how productive or how accountable their employees are. And so now that the employees are working at home, they're a little bit more sensitive to that. And so what I also tell them, the employee, is make certain commitments to accomplish certain goals and then exceed those so that the manager will see that you're working really hard.
Right. And then Suzette Baker has asked, is Friday productivity down because hours have been cut? She said that's her case. What this has done is caused her to do 40 hours of work in a 4-day work week. I guess, Suzette, you mean I'm not sure what you mean about your hours being cut. Can you elaborate? You might. There you are.
So what our office did after COVID is send everybody home. And at first we had 40 hours, and then they cut them back to 32. And so now what we're doing, the employees are working basically doing the work that they do in a 40-hour work week in a 32-hour work week now. So as far as I can see, productivity has gone way up. While I feel like it's taking advantage of the employees, but definitely, like I don't work on Fridays now. So would that show productivity being down on Fridays? Absolutely. That's my thought. What do you guys think?
I think that's a perfect example of an organization trying to take advantage of a situation where they're trying to cut back on overhead, and then they're concerned about productivity. It's really hard to do both. We've seen it. We've actually had organizations ask us in our consultative practice, since the employee is not paying for gas, they're not spending time commuting, and they are just much better off. Can I cut their pay? And when you think in those terms, that's not conducive to keeping employees long term.
Yeah, thanks, Suzette. Any other questions? Just please use the chat feature. I want to shift it a little bit now from the focus on companies and their employees to the community and economic development organizations. And there's a number of concepts we want to cover here. We're going to wrap it up by 11:45, so I want to shift to this now. Michael, share with us what, in your opinion, makes a community remote work friendly for workers and for companies? Is there a difference in communities that make them more conducive or less conducive to remote work?
Yeah, in the early days, the biggest obstacle was infrastructure, technology, pipes to the house. That was one of the obstacles. but that's really not that big of a deal anymore. I think the community has to recognize how important telework can be for their community value proposition. One of the things that organizations are looking at when they move to communities, and you're in this business, you can confirm this, is a high-tech environment, good quality employees, a pool of employees, a quality community quality of life, and such things as extra things that people can do on the weekends and those kinds of things. We've discovered that telework actually can attract more employers to a community. And one of the things that in my research for this, I came across a page called livable.com, and what they do is they offer livable communities statistics. And this is one thing that surprised me. It says, while our list is a best place to live list, it's nearly impossible to separate where we live from where we work. Now, to me, that made sense 20 years ago. But today, there are people that live in your community who work for a company that's across the nation. At the same time, there are people organizations that are in your community that has employees, and it's an enlarging pool of employees that work somewhere outside of your community. So the workplace flexibility and the digital workplace is suddenly changing the entire composition of work and where you work, because frankly, what happens, people are starting to realize is that work is not a place to go, but it's what you do. When people were saying, I'm going to work, they imagine they're going to a building, but that's no longer the case.
Right, and as we've discussed in some of our previous webinars, Michael, what I call the geography of work has been disrupted.
Yes.
Workers don't necessarily need to locate close to companies. And as we all know in the economic development field, with the economic boom we had before COVID, so many companies were gravitating to where the workers are, and that tended to be, in some cases, larger metro areas. But sort of that dance between companies and workers has been disrupted, and companies can be a little more footloose, as well as workers can be a little more footloose. So I think it's very intriguing to think about communities becoming competitive in attracting companies and workers because they are remote work friendly. Let's talk a little bit about what economic development agencies can do to help their companies and workers be more successful with remote work. Michael, you and I talked a bit about that. You want to kick that off?
Absolutely. I think the very first thing that economic development organizations need to do is make sure that they have a telework program themselves. Because if they are approaching organizations that say, you need to be teleworking, and they're not doing it, how can they back that up, right? Not only that, but it gives them the experience as to how it can be such a great value to that organization. And make sure that you know who is teleworking in your organization, in your community. I recommend that you go and survey the community, unless you already have. Find out who's doing it, what are they getting out of it, and use their testimonials for recruiting other organizations within the community to start their own program. How did they get there? What were the obstacles? The other things that you can do is you can join. There's the IFMA is and I'm sure you're probably familiar with that, but they have a subcommittee called Workplace Evolutionaries. And this is an organization that has speakers that will come out and speak to employers it would be great for the economic development folks to join IFMA and these subcommittees so that they can learn and become a part of that whole process. Even the Society for Human Resources Management, SHRM, is a really good resource for those kinds of things where you can meet with other people that are already doing this. And the other thing I would recommend is that one of the big changes in the community has been these remote work centers. I would go out of my way to support them because it helps bring not only the incubator type businesses into town, but it helps you become a telework city.
Michael, explain that a little bit more. The concept of incubators has long been part of community and economic development, but remote work centers, especially, I mean, there are obviously private companies that do that provide that in urban areas, shared office space and the like, but for smaller communities, possibly, what would you suggest? What would those teleworking centers look like, and how would somebody get them started?
I was working with Lorraine Community College in Lorain, Ohio, and they were in the early stages of setting up an incubator at the university, at the college itself, and they were a tiny little community, and that was all of the buzz in the community, and anybody that needed to have a place or a place to become their business and establish a location. Plus, they had access to funding. They had access to the professors that would be advisors, and at the same time, they would have small companies start locating their businesses there as a place to interact with all of these people with like-minded challenges.
Right. Got a couple more comments, questions. Ilka McConnell says that there's a real opportunity for smaller communities as long as they do have reliable high-speed connectivity. And I wasn't aware of this, but Vermont now has a state incentive for remote workers to relocate to their state. I've certainly heard of many communities offering incentives for high-tech workers to move to their communities, but that's interesting that Vermont is targeting remote workers. That's interesting. And Tom Robinson asked if we have a template for a community survey of teleworkers. And Michael, you and I discussed as we do our summary of this webinar, which we'll get out to everybody in a few days, we'll offer them some thoughts on that, on how they could make their communities more remote work friendly,
right?
And kind of a checklist. So we will definitely do that. I think another great concept that we discussed is, Michael, is becoming remote work certified. I mean, all the economic developers know that that community certification in one area or another has long been a standard of economic development strategy. Many states have their own development ready certification programs. Many communities or organizations offer certified sites and buildings and the like. And that the advantage of certification is that it helps remove some of the risk or uncertainty of companies that might be considering a community. If a company knows that a community is certified in aerospace sites, or you can even get that detail, then that gives them some confidence in selecting that community and helps that community make it through the initial screening process. I'm intrigued by the concept of becoming remote work certified. I just throw this out. Michael, you and I have been talking about a program like this. And if we have any communities that are represented in this webinar that want to work with us on this initially, we'd be happy to do that. And Michael, I understand that you, even in the early days, were looking at a certification program. Any comments on that?
Well, and just to let everyone know, what I had already done before I retired from ework.com, one of the last things that I did was I set up a telework certification program. The goal was to offer training and support and tools for managers on how to become a highly effective manager, for employees on how to become an effective remote worker, plus working in the home office. And then we even threw in a negotiation skills certification. But one of the things that I've also done is put together a certification requirements for companies. In other words, it would involve such things as a clear set of program goals and objectives, a published policy and a set of procedures, a pilot program to start the whole thing, education, training, and perception, communications, and then the establishment of a program. Now, there's no reason that we couldn't take that whole concept and bring it to the community level, right? So what would be the criteria by which you, as a community, would say, this is the criteria by which we can call you as a certified, we can certify you as a telework friendly community, and hook it on the chain of economic development, because if this becomes successful, not only will it help your community, but it'll help your whole industry.
Yeah, and again, if anybody in the webinar wants to work with us on being a beta test for this, we'll be happy to talk about working with you on that. I think it's a great concept. So let us know if you want to do that. Michael, I guess at this point, I'd like to look at the sort of what you think the future of remote work is going to be. We've talked a little bit about that, but I'd like to jump back on that. What do you think the equilibrium is going to be for this whole remote work situation? Are we going to, is COVID hopefully soon dissipates as an immediate threat if we develop a vaccine? Are people going to go back to the office? How permanent is this going to be, and what do you think it's going to look like 2 years from now, assuming that COVID is somewhat tamed?
Well, the amazing thing is that being in this business for 30 years, we've seen this tiny little blip of progress over the years, and then suddenly everyone's doing it. And we never expected that. I mean, we always said that as a business continuity solution for pandemics, you should be ready to telework, but we never, ever expected. Matter of fact, I've come out of retirement as a result of it. I really believe that there has been so many executives that have recognized the value of this, that pandemic or not, they're going to keep it around. But they're also recognizing that it has to be formalized. People have to be prepared for it. Managers have to keep their employees accountable. And it has to be, it can't be full time all the time. That's one of the challenges that you have with this current situation, is that it's all the time, full time. And there are most parents who have children at home and they can't go to school. They have the extra burden of having this duality of responsibilities. And so once the pandemic settles down, I think we're going to find a rather significant number of employers adopting this as a formal program. And that's why it's so important for every community out there to position themselves to say, if you're changing and if you are downsizing your building as a result of it, and that's one thing that we really hadn't talked about. The biggest trend that's been going on, and this is accelerating it, is shared work environment, where instead of having one employee for one desk, you'll have one desk for 7 employees. So you have a shared work environment, so that when somebody comes into the work environment, they're not going to their desk, they're picking a desk for the job that they have that day. And so once people recognize that they can reduce their overhead by reducing their physical footprint, that's going to change the outlook of every single city in this nation and frankly around the world. And the whole model for building buildings and filling them up is no longer going to be the model that's sustainable.
Yeah, and you know, again, I go back to what it's done for Atlanta traffic. It's just incredible. It's almost a joy to get out and drive in Atlanta, and that it's been a long time since we've done that, I tell you. Well, we're approaching the end of our time. Gotten a couple other comments. Anybody else want to ask a quick question? Amanda, go back to you. Your company, Rock, Paper, Scissors, has always been in a way remote work because you can do that. But what is your, real quick, what are your observations as a CEO of a company about how well more remote work has worked for you, and what have the challenges been?
Yeah, we've dabbled in it. We've always had like an aspect of it. And, you know, Michael, to your point, it was slow and steady. And then all of a sudden we're like, all right, let's do this. I know for us, a big influence was actually the ice storms in 2013, where we got shut down for 2 weeks. And I was like, that's it. We have to be able to work remote. I don't want to lose there's no reason as an agency for us to lose productivity. So that's kind of where, as a leader, it was, you know, that was what, 7 years ago, realizing that shift needed to happen for us. And I think that's what a lot of companies live through now. So I feel like, and as an advantage, we knew we had already been, you know, we had 7 years of experience in that before this whole shutdown. And it's all about management and culture. Culture is such a huge part of that. And how do we help leaders understand how does that culture translate? And what does culture feel like in a digital world?
Exactly.
And so there's a lot of misconceptions and assumptions as leaders that we have to start breaking. And I think one of the strongest things for me has just been directly asking my team, what do they want? And then also being comfortable and confident enough to tell them how I feel about it and saying, these are my concerns. You come back to me and work through that. So I think open dialogue has been critical. We're a small team, so it makes it a little bit easier. So I think that's a huge piece of that. But there's one thing that I'm observing that I think, and I want to kind of plant the seed, is we used to always call it teleworking. And now with the pandemic, we're calling it remote work. So as a brander, we've had a brand shift in that. And I'm really curious just to kind of, for people to think about, like, why did we rename it in this pandemic? And what has that done? Because it's been around a long time, but we're calling it something new.
Well, just for a little perspective on that, when I started in the business, it was called telecommuting. Mm-hmm. And that was the most frequently searched word. As a matter of fact, when I published my book in 2001, telecommuting was voted out by the national organization, but the book publisher said, we got to use telecommuting because that's what they're going to search for.
Yeah.
Right? So there's competing requirements. And then we went into virtual work. And nobody liked that because people are virtually working, right? Then there were several different iterations, and remote work is okay, but telework seems to be the one that's sticking, and you know, the media is driving a lot of it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, interesting you should mention that. One of my colleagues who was a pioneer in online research, and actually, if some of you recall, CNN used to have factoids. He was a researcher, and he coined that phrase. And his early comments on telework was, they call it telework because your boss can't tell it if you're working. But anyway, I think we're way past that. And we're at 11:45. Thanks, everybody, for the comments. We will be getting out to you in a few days a summary of this webinar, and we'll post a blog on our prosperousplaces.org website, and hopefully we can continue the conversation there. But I've gotten several comments and questions, and I'll be following up with you individually on some of that. Wow, the comments are coming in now. those are great. Hey, thanks everybody. And send us any more questions or comments, and we will work those into the summary that we do. And Michael, I really, really want to thank you for taking the time and sharing your experiences with us. It's been very, very educational. And even though we've talked a lot about this, I learned a lot more today from you than I had previously. So thanks for that.
Well, it's been a challenge to dust off some of those brain cells, but I've really enjoyed it too. And I hope that I've given some people some insights to think about as they enter into the new world.
Well, we can really tell her that you're working. So thank you. Thanks, everybody. We're going to shut it down. Let's keep the conversation going. Amanda, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Everyone have a good one.
Thank you.
Yep, everybody have a great day. Bye-bye.